This book is a scholarly book, and there are nearly 400 citations. Now, all out of 400, 390 are from non-Muslims. If I succeed even in a small measure in persuading both communities to shed their mutual suspicion and adopt family planning with equal fervor, I would consider that as my humble contribution to nation building. This is my desire through the book. All communities have some extent of polygamy, and the least polygamous are the Muslims. I found that at no point in time the number of Muslim children was more than just one. If there were Hindus had 4 children, Muslims had 5. Muslims have been accepting family planning in the last 30, 40 years faster than the Hindus. The plan to create a rift between communities is long and deep-rooted and deep-seated. So whether it is the Muslims or non-Muslims, even anybody's myth has to be challenged and the reality is explained to them. जब जब चुनाव आता है, गरीब के पेट में पुलाव आता है.
Thank you so much, Qureshi sir, for finding time for India podcast for listeners and viewers. It is our most pleasure to have you with us today.
My pleasure.
So first, congratulations for your new release. It's come out to say at the right time. Can I say that? Have you really planned your book launch at the time when we are getting into election? Is there some time planning that happened, or it is just by chance that we saw it coming around?
No, not at all. Actually, this book was in the making for 25 years. So, yeah, so it happens that some elections are happening. And in any case, 5 states going to the poll has nothing to do with my book, because it has not only pan-India appeal, it has the trans-world or pan-world appeal, or should I say the interest and relevance. Because in almost every country where there are Muslims and another, even entirely Muslim countries also, this has been a debate whether family planning is allowed by Islam or not. Yes. So it has a global relevance, and I knew about that, and I chose my publisher accordingly, who has an international footprint, and they're selling it in America, also by Amazon.com, so in US dollars. So that's a good thing. And I must say the response has been even better than I had anticipated.
What you had expected.
Yes.
So I think the first question which came to my mind when I read the topic, and especially when you come out with this population myth and you're bursting it, how and what made you come up with this title, first of all, when you say the population myth? You're trying to clear the doubt somewhere, or you have already declared that it is a myth that you all are living in? It's not so true. So can you explain that?
Like every other Muslim, I thought that Islam is against family planning.
Yes.
And I found that Islam was not only not against family planning, Islam was supportive of the concept, and as far back as 1400 years ago, when there was no population pressure anywhere in the world. And here was the Quran, which was talking about, the quality of life and quality of bringing, health of women, health of children. And Quran advised, there is one verse in the Quran which says, young men, to keep yourself chaste, you must marry when you have the wherewithal. When you have the wherewithal is the principal clause for me. So somebody who was very poor, he went to the Prophet and to seek an explanation. He said that the Quran says that I should marry when I have the wherewithal. I don't have, I'm a poor man, but I have my sexual desires. What do I do? So Prophet repeated that ayat, and he said, till you have the wherewithal, you should resort to fasting, because that will suppress sexual desires. So it becomes a complete recipe. So now this was, for instance, a myth which got dispelled from my mouth. And when I studied the subject, the fact that हम पांच हमारे 25, हम चार हमारे 40, implying thereby that every Muslim deliberate, and actually this was the propaganda that Muslims deliberately marry many wives so that they produce many children and overtake Hindu population to capture political power. हम पांच हमारे 25, that means every Muslim has 4 wives and 20 children, or another narrative, 40 children. Find me one in 138 crore people, you find me one Muslim who has 4 wives and 20 children, not to talk of 40 children. So, and this kind of thing with repeatedly voiced, articulated by even very top leaders of the country. So everybody thought, and including me, that okay, yes, Muslim must be marrying many wives, must be putting too many children. All this turned out to be a myth, or there's several myths in it. The Government of India data found that all communities have some extent of polygamy, and the least polygamous are the Muslims. The least polygamous. I'm not polygamous, but I'm willing to fight and die for my right. No, don't ban it. I think if I don't practice it, I should fall in line and say that, okay, ban it, because I'm not practicing it anyway. And those who are polygamous, more than me, more than the community, they are the ones who are always criticizing, forgetting that they themselves are more polygamous. So this was another myth. Now, whether Muslims were responsible for the population explosion, I found that at no point in time, the number of Muslim children was more than just one. If there were Hindus had 4 children, Muslims had 5. If Hindus had 5 children, Muslims had 6.
So the ratio, which was just one gap, was one child.
The gap was only 1. And which also, by the way, has come down to 0.5 now, which shows that the gap is narrowing, and Muslims have been accepting family planning in the last 30-40 years faster than the Hindus. So therefore, Muslims being responsible for population explosion, that was another myth which got broken.
When you yourself realized these myths and you went to burst it, one thought that must have come to you is, why was Muslim community at all targeted or brought out in this manner, that they are encouraging family, not going for family planning or more population? Why this whole propaganda, or that narration started in the system? What happened that led to it?
Yes.
Was it part of
your very, very good question. In fact, I have answered it in my book that there could be 2 possible reasons. One, that the people who are spreading this false narrative were themselves ignorant, or they knew but they were deliberately, consciously spreading a lie to create a rift between communities, to create hatred among the Hindus for the Muslims. Look, these are the guys who are responsible for population, and they have a political intention. So now I have also, having given these 2 options, I have said that the first alternative is not possible, because most of the organizations which are guilty of this have, they have research organizations, they study, they are scholarly, and therefore it is not out of ignorance, therefore it is out of mischief. It is out of deliberate mischief that they know it, yet they must keep on spreading this false propaganda. I don't know, I may be wrong, they may be ignorant. In either case, if they're ignorant, their ignorance should be turned into knowledge. And if it is deliberate mischief, it has to be called. So nobody has challenged this narrative, which is why they've gone and challenged for 40, 50 years. And I thought through my book, and it is based on all Government of India data. It's just an analysis of Government of India data. Nothing, no emotional argument, no political argument. It's just data. There were initially 2-3 fallacies. One, that Muslims are producing, multiplying like rabbits, and they are doing it through polygamy to capture political power. And as a result of that, the gender ratio, not gender ratio, but demographic ratio is getting disturbed.
That is the fear that still exists. 30% can't be the population where Muslim.
Correct. So, in fact, my book starts with two admissions. One, it is true that Muslims have the highest birth rate. Number 2, the demographic balance has been upset a little. From 84%, Hindus have come down to 79.8. and these 4.2 have been distributed over minorities, mainly the Muslims, which have gone up from 9.8 to 14.2. Now, but after that, the story changes because 30, 40 years, the Muslim acceptance of family planning started in such a big way, faster than the Hindus, which is why the gap started narrowing. The gap, which was actually 1.1 children in 92, for instance, NFHS 1, National Family Health Survey 1, has come down to 0.5. In fact, a bit lesser than 0.5.
So, sir, does that also mean that the demographic balance is also going to narrow, that gap of 84% to 79 that Hindus have gone down? That will again cover up and we'll have a balance back in place?
Yeah. The balance has to be back in place because this increase in the Muslim acceptance of family planning is so fast. The gap, which is now 0.5, will narrow down further, and by 2045, when the population of India is supposed to stabilize, this gap will become almost zero. If I may also mention, in terms of insecurity which was being created in the mind of the Hindu, that these guys will overwhelm you with their numbers. If you see in absolute numbers, these percentages are mentioned, but in absolute numbers, if in 1951 there were 30 crore more Hindus than Muslims, now there are 80 crore more Hindus than Muslims, despite Muslim birth rate being the highest, because the base of the Hindus is so large that even a small percentage increase is adding lots of numbers. And to clinch the argument, I got a friend of mine who was a vice chancellor of Delhi University, Professor Dinesh Singh, a great mathematician. I asked him, requested him to do a mathematical model for me. That like in 60 years, Muslims increased by 4 percentage point. So to increase by 40 percentage point, how many years? A child will tell you 600 years. So he said, not even 600 years, 1,000 years, forget about it, you can never overtake. That is a mathematical model.
So this is not model. A possibility at any cost to be
at any cost, at any time ever, till eternity.
A lot of things come by the interpretation. Even though the Quran supports family planning and not polygamy, how much of the interpretation matters to its implementation, and how much in today's generation the right interpretation is playing a role there?
No, there are two parts of your question. Number one, what are the factors? And you mentioned education.
Education, poverty, and representation.
Particularly of girls. Actually, there are three factors, and not religion. Religion is very superficially a factor for the Muslim. Now, one is the literacy, particularly of girls. As the literacy goes up, the birth rate comes down across all communities. Secondly, poverty. As the income goes up, the birth rate comes down. Okay. And as the service delivery improves, that is what you did not mention. As the service delivery improves, the birth rate comes down. So we have to focus on that. The other thing is about interpretation of Islam. I did on the side a little primary study also in Hyderabad, Lucknow, and Alwar, to see what is it that those who are not accepting, those Muslims particularly, who are not accepting family planning, what is their reason? So many of them said that Islam is against it. Now I asked them, who told you that? So they were very vague about it. Oh, that is what we have heard. Or somebody specifically said the local imam. So we went to the local imam and asked him, okay, who told you that? Tell us what is the position. So there was a general vague feeling. So which is the myth which I wanted to break among the Muslims, because they thought that Islam is against family planning. And since people were not aware, now if you are a family planning worker and you come to me and say that you have too many children, and I have only two, by the way, and only one wife. So if somebody comes to me as a family planning worker and I tell him or her that sorry, I will not accept family planning because it is against my religion. No, obviously you will just hang your head and go away, because who is going to argue on religion? Now, if you are equipped to argue with me, no, you are wrong. This is what the religion says. This is the ayat from the Quran. This is the hadith. So at least there should be some persuasion. So we did not equip our family planning worker to answer these questions, and which is one of the reasons why this myth continued unchallenged. So whether it is the Muslims or non-Muslims, even anybody's myth has to be challenged, and the reality is explained to them. Now, in Hyderabad, for instance, if a Muslim family has 2 children, in Bihar, a Hindu family has 5 children. Now, what conclusion should we draw?
But
The
in
only
Bengal, we have highest percentage of Muslims as well. So how do you compare that? Why Muslims in one state are less educated? That is why their family planning is not working in favor.
correct.
How does this number vary?
Yes,
state
yeah,
wise?
you're quite right now. But for instance, when you mentioned Bengal, Bengal doesn't have very, although it doesn't have very high literacy and it doesn't have high income, but Bengal's population growth has never been questioned. It is only UP, Bihar, the four Bimaru state, or so-called Bimaru state, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, UP, and Rajasthan. Because here, if Muslims are illiterate, so are the Hindus. If Muslims are poor, so are the Hindus. So it is basically regional variation, regional socio-economic differential rather than religion. Because now there are 22 states in the country where Muslims have higher family planning acceptance, lower birth rate than Hindus of Bihar. Now, if Islam was the factor, then Muslims all over the country would be producing many children. In fact, I believe that South Indian Muslims are better than we North Indian Muslims. So, but then they have accepted family planning very happily. Do you know 24 states out of 29 in the country have gone below the replacement ratio, 2.1. So, which means that when the parent dies, the children will take over. 24 states, even the existing population will not be replaced. That has been the success story of our family planning.
I think your book there gives out a message to youngsters who understand it, that we should not fear but understand the problem at the base level, and find it more sensible approach should be taken rather than taking the decision propaganda. So you have been very popular as the election commissioner, chief election commissioner in India. You have had your own popular presence because of certain reforms that you brought about and your personality. You have been a great orator then. Sir, when you talk about voting in India, you have spoken about how voting education works better than a forced voting. How are you looking at the situation in terms of election today since you left that position? Do you think it's really working in a better turnaround or turnout, whether it's state election or the national election? How do you think situation is panning out?
Well, in terms of voter turnout and voter participation, definitely it has gone exactly in the same direction. In fact, some of my successors told me, even when they were under attack from various quarters, that at least what kept them going was increasing turnout. So I had introduced this voter education department and a program called SWEEP in 2010 Bihar election on an experimental basis, which gave me historic turnout. The highest ever turnout in history happened in 2010 Bihar election. And since we had targeted women and youth, the women turned out in larger number than men. Although their absolute numbers is less, the gender ratio is adverse. Despite that, women came out in large number. Now we see that at least half the states, the number of women turning out is more than the men's turnout. And young people whom I address, particularly through creation of National Voters Day, 25th of January, and we have seen that it was used to be 10 to 12% of 18 to 19-year-old, the first-time voters, young voters, who were getting registered. Now it has gone up to over 80%, from 10-12% to 80%. So youth are participating. So I think this phenomenon has only improved.
There have been some doubts on the working of the institution since you quit. So how do you look at that?
I would not like to comment on that, because there is the same department where I worked, and now there are others, and they are doing their best. But EVM controversy, which has been around from the beginning, off and on, has resurfaced, and we need to answer that. All that I've been telling my young successors, that they should be very quick in responding to public doubt, because if it penetrates young people's mind, it is difficult to take it out from there. because convincing political parties is much easier. All we used to do just call in all party meeting, discuss with them 4 5 hour meeting,
Negotiate
and
it
we
and yes.
negotiate. But if they become the public the discourse and public perception that EVMs are flawed and they're doing fraud, so we need to answer that quickly every time and repeatedly. So if the doubt is being expressed repeatedly, our response should also be repeated. You all heard of Coca-Cola, have you not? But they spend $2 billion just to remind you of Coca-Cola. Why? Because even a positive message has to be repeated. So the silence of the election commission is not a good option.
Do you believe in one nation, one election?
No, I have a nuanced answer because it's not an easy question to answer. There are merits and demerits of both the positions. Now, from the point of view of election commission, one election is the easiest thing to do because once in 5 years we'll conduct elections because voter is the same. Polling station is the same, polling machinery is the same, security apparatus is the same. So we conduct an election at all three levels and now go and play golf for the next 5 years. So it is good for us. So, but our convenience cannot be a factor. Now it's a large federal country. Now suppose we create a one nation, one election kind of situation. And Lok Sabha, in the Lok Sabha, the government falls as it did in the time of Mr. Vajpayee in 13 days. Now, 29 states which have come to the poll at the same time with their absolute majorities, why should they be affected? Because 10 MPs change their parties in Lok Sabha. Why? Why destabilize a country's democracy? And secondly, one politician of Odisha, I heard him say, and it appealed to me, he said, what do people want? He said, people love elections. Particularly poor people, they love elections because this is the only power they have. Otherwise, a politician will come to your door only once in 5 years, and after taking your vote, he just disappears and will come to you after 5 years. Now, at least because of repeated elections, they keep coming to you. Then also, I attended one youth parliament in MIT Pune, where a girl from Chhattisgarh came out with a very interesting slogan in her speech. She said, "जब जब चुनाव आता है, गरीब के पेट में पुलाव आता है." Now, poor people like elections because they get job opportunities, they get work opportunities, and the money of the politician gets recycled. 50,000 crores is the estimate of money spent by the politician in the last election. Now, these 50,000 crores coming into the mainstream, going to the poor. Now, these are the positive sides.
I think that is why the rural turnout is always higher than the urban turnout, is what I'm also getting a sense, because it
correct, because this is for most poor people, this is the only power they have, and they want to exercise it again and again. So, since it is a complex issue, and it will require constitutional changes, which is why it has not been implemented. Otherwise, this is a strong government with a strong majority. They could have pushed it down the throat of the nation, but they haven't. Even the Prime Minister said that he wants a debate on this, and the debate is going on. And hopefully, only when a consensus is achieved, the next step will be taken. Till then, we should not tinker. As there is a saying that don't try to tinker with something which is working. So it may even stop working then. So,
I think even there is a discussion of bringing the new law for having a standard for population control. That might also be looked at.
In fact, I have mentioned in the book also, and I have been asked this question repeatedly, and even in the context of election, for instance, compulsory voting. I've always said compulsion and democracy don't go together.
It's always good to educate.
Your right to vote includes your right not to vote. And any compulsion can be counterproductive. China did it, but what happened? They had to take it back. Now, I have said that the Indian Family Planning Program, which was the oldest, we were the first country to introduce National Family Planning Program in 1952. To my mind, it is a success story because, as I said, that 24 of 29 states have already gone down the replacement level. Just 4 states are lagging behind, and they are also coming quite close to it. Another push, and there is a large unmet need of all communities. Just which means that you are mentally prepared, you want the family planning, but there is no service available. If you can give them a service push.
So we also have one very innocent question from a youngster from Dubai. He says that I stay away from my country and I want to vote for my nation, but my job doesn't allow me. Nobody pays for it when I travel. So if I want to vote, can there be electronic voting in India seen anytime in future?
Sooner or later it will happen, but currently we are not looking at electronic voting because remember at a time when even an innocent standalone EVM is being challenged and questioned. So electronic voting will be questioned 1,000 times over. It will be suspected 1,000 times. So, therefore we
there
cannot.
There are more risk and security issues with that.
Correct. And in fact, for two non-technical reasons, we are not looking at electronic voting. One is your security, the other is your integrity. Now, for instance, somebody comes to your house, puts a gun on your head. Give me your computer. I'll vote from your computer myself. Now, we cannot protect you at your home. Or somebody comes and gives you an envelope. Here is 2,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, and give me your computer. So we cannot guarantee that. We cannot insure against that. So for these two reasons, we are at the moment not looking at internet voting, but it is being examined. So at some point, when situation is ripe and conducive, probably it will be tried.
Don't you feel since the electronic media have come up, independent candidates don't get their own share of existence? Don't you feel that electronic coverage of elections should be banned totally, including the polls?
No, I would not think so. No, it is true that the number of independents has come down drastically. There are hardly few. But many people argue that the institution of independent candidates actually should be abolished. Let only political parties contest because these independents become loose cannon. They are the people who have the highest price in the horse trading. They play the most important role because they do not have any string that tie. They do not have, the restrictions of anti-defection law and things because they are independent. So, and then they demand their price. They become ministers. So, actually, the independent candidate should be discouraged. It perhaps could be abolished. That is a demand which has a lot of merit. So let political parties contest and people have a right to choose.
Sir, does your book at any point you think is challenging the larger political approach of the government where they come up with a Hindutva agenda or a message for uniting the nation today, understanding that Hindu is a way of life and not a religion? So do you think this is going to somewhere attack that phenomenon and find itself lost in the political agenda somewhere?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I have challenged it. I have questioned it. Whosoever is doing it, even if the government is guilty of it, I have questioned it. And that's what I've tried to say, that, this myth has gone unchallenged so far. They keep saying and we just keep quiet because nobody has questioned. But at the same time, it is not to say that I'm the only one or the first one to talk about it. This book is a scholarly book and there are nearly 400 citations. Now all out of 400, 390 are from non-Muslims who are saying more or less this is what I'm saying, exactly the same thing. I have come across these myths as far back as 1995 when I did my 33-page paper for UNFPA. See, this is all based on data. Every time I was almost ready with the book, the new set of data will come in. Fortunately, now not once, not twice, 4 NFHS surveys have come after my initial paper. And every survey has actually strengthened and reinforced my original hypothesis. So which is a good thing. And now the fifth one, NFHS 5 is around the corner. And I was very worried that at least now I should publish
now you should come out with
it. Yes, that's right.
So before we close it, I would like you to read one or two of your lines from the book so that we can have anything you want to choose and read from the book if it is right in front of you. Any small paragraph or any important verse of Quran that you think gives a strong message.
Now, clinching verse from the Quran. It says, let those who find not the wherewithal for marriage keep themselves chaste until Allah gives them means out of His grace. So that means till you have the wherewithal, hold on, keep your marriage away. But to keep yourself chaste, it's good to marry because if you're married, then you will not be looking around and pawing the women. So this is what it means. I've given this in Arabic so that the ulama, because I was
We can
frankly
read it.
more scared of a backlash from the ulama that they could not pass a fatwa against me for saying something
Did you
against
have
Islam
any
because
flack against you, sir? Any flack
for
till now?
that would fortunately not as yet, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But not yet, because I have been very, very careful. If I may tell you, in fact, let me read out from the acknowledgement, which is the journey of the book, which is at the end of the book, about 2 paragraphs. Yeah, that's the idea of this book was born in a surprise development. When country director UNFPA India, Tavi Abram, visited me in my office in 1994, accompanied by his program officer, Ina Singh. He said he wanted me to write a strategy paper for family planning among the Muslims in India. This was a strange request, as I was neither an Islamic scholar nor a family planning expert, never having worked in the health ministry, either in the state of Haryana, my service cadre, or in the central government. Not sure what I would write, I tried my best to excuse myself as I tried to explain. I was asked to present my research paper at several conferences and lectures. There again, I persisted with my decision not to accept any money. Now, this was my inner voice. How it turned out to be prophetic is what I'm going to tell you. This decision not to accept any money was proved providential. 5 years later, I was staying with my daughter in her hostel in London when I received a call from one Dr. Qureshi, president of Muslim Doctors Association of UK, who said he wanted to discuss my paper. I got the feeling that the tone was somewhat threatening. Not wanting to get beaten up in London, I tried to wriggle out, saying I have my flight back early next morning. The guys arrived at the airport with a few books in hand next morning, and the opening sentence was such that I have remembered it all these years. And what was it? Mr. Qureshi, family planning is a Western conspiracy against Islam, and they hire mercenaries like you through UN agencies to write such papers. Well, I was hired by a UN agency, therefore I became a mercenary writing for money. So all these charges would have stuck if I had accepted the money. So my inner voice that I will do it for pro bono turned out to be prophetic. And since I had not taken any money with my great moral authority, then I paused on them and explained to them that this cannot be a Western conspiracy against Islam or Muslims, and which is what I have explained in further elaboration.
It's a beautiful, beautiful effort, sir. We hope your message and your voice reaches masses on both sides, and it helps people understand things rather than go just influenced by what is going as a propaganda.
Now, if I succeed even in a small measure in persuading both communities to shed their mutual suspicion and adopt family planning with equal fervor, I would consider that as my humble contribution to nation building. This is my desire through the book.
Thank you so much. I think that was the best closing line we got from you. And we will make sure that this reaches to masses and we are able to understand what you try to make us understand through this book. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, sir.